Federal Fag and Alex Reynolds Mystery Series Book 2. Author Fred Hunter, publisher St. Martin's Press, New York, 1998. Narrator Eric Ost. For Raymond Dragon. Chapter 1. I don't usually rent porno movies. The only reason I fell from grace that particular evening was that Peter had gone to his high school reunion without me. Most people would be relieved at not being required to attend such a function, but with me it was different. Peter didn't want me to go because he didn't want to introduce his old classmates to his husband. He did go so far as to allow me to accompany him to Los Angeles with the promise that we'd spend the week after vacationing in the sun and sand. But his refusal to take me to the actual event still rankled and caused what was, for us, a rare argument. I was in an untenable position since I felt snubbed by not being taken to an event that I didn't really want to attend, but there was a principle at work here. I thought it was ludicrous for Peter to leave me behind, given that all of his high school buddies had known at the time that he was gay. Peter was out of the closet before he'd even realized he was supposed to be in one. He explained that although most everyone had been cool about his sexuality when he was in high school, liberal children have a habit of growing up into adults who are middle class in the worst way. And he had no intention of subjecting me or himself to the hoots and sneers of people who weren't worth my time. Besides, he added, I'd just be bored. Of course, the only possible response for me to make to that was, then why the hell do you want to go? He'd replied with a shrug, they were my friends. All this boiled down to the fact that it was simply easier on him to go to the reunion without me. So there I was on Saturday evening alone in our room at the Hotel Windermere by the sea in Santa Monica, with Peter off to his classmates and my mother 2,000 miles away in our townhouse in Chicago. I'd selected a video with the auspicious title, Big Tools of the Trade. I popped it into the VCR that came with the room in our fairly classy digs. The usual disclaimer about all actors in the video being 18 or older popped on the screen, and I smiled at the use of the term actor. While the opening credits ran, I slipped out of my clothes and dropped onto the bed, nestling in the rose-colored sheets. Satin can be very comforting when you're feeling sorry for yourself. Suffice it to say that, to put it as delicately as possible, the first encounter took care of my needs, and I went to wash up, neglecting to stop the VCR. When I came back into the room, one of the hotel's semi-plush white towels wrapped around my waist. I was about to stop and rewind the tape when I glanced at the TV. 3 young men were going through a series of acrobats in an apparent attempt to prove they could somehow find physical satisfaction while defying gravity. Something about the scene seemed really strange to me. Besides what they were doing, there was something vaguely familiar about one of the men. I sat on the edge of the bed and peered closely at the set. The camera switched from a long shot of the 3 of them to a close-up of the man in the middle as he performed the sexual equivalent of burning the candle at both ends. And then it struck me. It was Patrick Gleason. I'd gone to college with him. I told myself I was shocked and that I wasn't turned on, despite the physical evidence to the contrary. I'd always believed that people who fucked for the camera only existed on celluloid, and it was unnerving to have it proven otherwise. It was the same feeling I had when I was in high school and ran into Mr. Fredrickson, my freshman English teacher, in a grocery store. I had pretty vocally expressed surprise at seeing him there, to the point that he gave me a rather withering look and exclaimed, Teachers eat too, you know. In fact, I was so stunned to find Patrick Gleason indecorously sandwiched between 2 noble youths. I thought that maybe my eyes were deceiving me. A possibility, since at those angles it was kind of hard to be sure. I fast-forwarded to the end of the tape, where they sometimes have a cast list with pictures. Slowly, to the beat of some innocuous pseudo-jazz, a list of players went by, each displayed in turn in full frontal nude shots with their names across the bottom of the screen. Of course, their names were purely fictitious to protect the guilty. There was Rock Harden, Ted Manley, and a couple of other young surfer types with equally adolescent pseudonyms. Then the man I was looking for flashed onto the screen. Butch Handy. He had long blonde hair, light blue eyes, and a thin layer of chest hair that started at his nipples and ran down to a point at his navel like a fur triangle. He had picked a particularly ironic moniker. He was anything but butch. In fact, he was rather pretty in an angular sort of way. If there had been any doubt in my mind that this was my old college buddy, Patrick Gleason, it was dispelled by the sight of that tiny shamrock tattooed on his right pelvic bone. I remembered it. "So how was it?" I said as Peter sat on the end of the bed and took off his shoes. "Boring," he replied. "Everybody was pretty much the way I remembered them." He sounded despondent and distracted, which is probably the way most people respond to their high school reunions. I avoid my own like the plague because they only serve to foster the idea that nobody ever achieves what they set out to do. Failure is the theme of the party. For Peter, the worst part about it was that he couldn't tell them the one really impressive thing that had happened to him of late, that along with me, he'd become a part-time spy. Peter and I inadvertently became mixed up in the middle of a government operation involving a kidnapping ring in Russia. After we proved instrumental in breaking it up, Lawrence Nelson, the government agent with whom we'd worked, had sort of drafted us as occasional agents. Since then, our assignments had been few and far between and pretty innocuous, although I did once get to fly to New York to meet a visiting agent from another country. I had no need to know which one, and made sure that he caught his connecting flight to Washington. Nothing a good skycap couldn't have done. Peter kicked his shoes and socks into a corner of the room, then got up and stripped off his pants and shirt. As he carefully slid his silk shirt onto a hanger and transferred it to the closet, I marveled again at how beautiful he is. His loose-fitting khaki boxer shorts complemented his olive skin and showed off his sleek, muscular legs. His stomach is flat, but it hasn't been exercised into something threatening, and his chest is tight. He has a dark head of hair that tends to be curly and deep green eyes. I can feel caressing me before we make contact. "What'd you do with yourself all evening?" he asked, in a tone that implied he was prepared for me to whine again about being left behind. He didn't know how ironic the question was. Nothing really." I glanced at the television set. "I have something to show you." "What?" "Well, while you were out tonight, I rented a movie." "You did?" I turned on the VCR and the TV, and I glanced back over my shoulder and said, sort of a movie. I rented this and got the surprise of my life. Somebody I went to college with is in it." "You're kidding!" "He's only in part of it," I replied, already regretting that I hadn't approached this more directly. "You have to see this." I pressed the play button on the VCR and stood back. I had rewound the tape to the middle of Patrick Gleason's scene, which now popped onto the screen at a point where the three participants was going at it with calculated abandon. Peter was silent, his arms folded across his chest. His expression was inscrutable. After a moment he said, "You rented a porno movie?" I realized at once that it would be folly to deny it as the erect bodies slapped against each other on the screen. "Well, you were gone," I said weakly. "You came all the way to Los Angeles to rent a porno movie." "No," I said. "I came here to be with you." Another silence followed, which I found a little more unsettling than the first because I thought just maybe he had gone too far. Finally he said, "Which one is your friend?" "The one in the middle." In a really inauspicious bit of timing, my former college mate chose that moment to moan, "Oh God, oh God." Peter pulled a slow take at me, the right side of his lip curling wryly. "You say you went to college with him? That was over 10 years ago." "Yeah," I said, glancing at the TV. "He's a little old for porno movies." So are you, he replied, his voice taking on an uncharacteristic, unattractive edge. It's not like you've never rented one. Peter sighed and put his arms around my neck. He smiled with that glint in his eyes, and I found attractive and said, You know that since we've been together, I've been satisfied to live one rather than rent one. He kissed my nose lightly. Are you still mad at me for going without you? I made a show of thinking about that for a second. No. Well, you were right. I should have taken you with me. I would have had somebody interesting to talk to, or at least to laugh at everybody with. You're not really upset because I rented that, are you? He glanced at the screen, shrugged, and said, You're a big boy. You got to do whatever you want. Really? I said. Our lips met as I slid my hands down into his shorts. I heard the TV snap off. I don't know how he reached the remote. We lay together for a while in the afterglow, Peter gently rolling my hair in his fingers. I let out a contented sigh and said, That was really weird. Thanks, he said, a smile in his voice. I mean finding Pat Gleason in a porno movie. Peter's fingers stopped their gentle twining of my hair. After a moment he said, Why, wasn't he the type? Well, I don't exactly know what type of person would end up in the kind of movie, but no, I don't think he was. He slept around in college, but everybody did. Really? He said with feigned shock. All I'm saying is, Pat was no worse than anybody else in the bed department. Peter craned his neck over to look at my face, his expression one of profound perplexity. I mean in terms of sheer numbers, I amended hastily. Oh, he replied, resting his head back against his pillow. And were you that active in college? I glanced at him to see whether or not he was serious. This was an area we seldom approached. Nope, I was shy. We lay there silently for a few moments. Peter went back to giving me a finger wave while I gently stroked his left nipple with my thumb. You know, I said, breaking the companionable silence, I'm worried about him. What? Patrick. When I knew him, he wanted to be an actor, really badly. That's how I met him. He was in a student production of Fiorello that I designed the sets for. He was serious about acting. The one performance I caught was very convincing. I shook my head lightly, my hair brushing against his cheek. I knew I should let the subject drop, but I just couldn't. I can't believe he's making porno. He must have known that once he'd done it, he'd have no chance of a mainstream acting career. Things must have gotten pretty bad for him to throw everything away like that. Then again, said Peter in that same opaque tone, maybe he just likes it. I pondered this along with what Patrick had been like when I'd known him. It would be convenient enough for me to believe that Peter was right, but since the memory of my relationship with Patrick still hurt, I had to distrust my own feelings. After a long silence, I said tentatively, Peter, the credits on that tape say it was made in Los Angeles. I think maybe I'll look Peter up while we're here. What? Why? Because I'm worried about him. Maybe I can help him? Yeah, right. I mean it, Peter, I said defensively. I'm worried about him. You know, what that life is like. No, I don't. And you don't either. I hope. Ignoring the last, I said, I mean, you've heard what that life's like. It's dangerous. Drugs, disease, and if you can believe the scuttlebutt, the mob is involved in the porn industry. The mob, said Peter, apostrophizing the words in a way designed to make me blush. I was angry that he succeeded. The mob organized crime, whatever you want to call it. And you're going to try to save this old friend of yours. You don't have to be so damn melodramatic. Not save him, but help if I can. You know as well as I do that if our positions were reversed, I mean yours and mine, that you tried to do something for him. I had him there, and he knew it. Truth to tell, Peter is more like me than either of us would care to admit. In fact, he would normally be the first one to let his compassion get the best of his reason. He stared at me for a couple of moments and said, "You're right, I would." He rolled over on his side, pulling the satin sheet up over his naked shoulder. "That doesn't mean I have to like it." Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.